Every diner has one regular nobody questions. The old man who tips well says little and blends into the wallpaper until the night he doesn't. Tonight a hand shatters against a stranger's grip in the dark behind a locked office door. Nobody hears it. Nobody except the sound itself, which doesn't stop echoing. Somewhere a drawer sits half an inch off from where it should be. A signature waits on an invoice nobody was ever meant to read twice. A woman smiles through a pain she's stopped explaining because explaining costs more than she has left. And in the corner booth over cold coffee, someone has already started counting the days. Not out of curiosity, out of memory. Because some men mistake silence for weakness. And some silences are just patience wearing an old man's face, waiting for the exact moment the whole room stops breathing at once. Delavos was already lying by 6:15 in the morning. Not the big kind. Not yet. Just the small one stitched into her face the second she pushed through the kitchen doors. The smile that said, "I'm fine." The smile that cost more than anyone in this diner would ever know. Because underneath the bandage wrapped tight around her left hand, something still throbbed with every step she took, every tray, every time her fingers so much as grazed the handle of a coffee pot. She didn't let it show. Couldn't. Not with rent due in 9 days. Not with Wren's inhaler running low in the medicine cabinet at home. Not with a manager already watching her from behind the register, like she owed him something just for walking through the door. Ellie's diner smelled the way it always did at this hour. Burnt coffee. Bacon grease, the faint sweetness of batter hitting a hot griddle. The booths filled in the same order they always did. The bell over the door rang again and again, a small, tired chime that never seemed to stop. Someone laughed too loud at table 4. Life moving on the way it always did, whether or not you were falling apart quietly behind a coffee pot. Della refilled a mug one-handed, balanced 2 plates against her hip, smiled at a trucker who tipped in quarters and called her sweetheart, like it cost him nothing, because it didn't. Then Wade Kessler's voice cut through the noise like a knife dragged flat across a plate. Table 6 is still waiting, Della. You planning on getting to them this year? She didn't look up, just kept moving because stopping meant looking at him, and looking at him meant he'd won something. On it, she said. On it. He repeated it back, mimicking her loud enough that the 2 women in the corner booth glanced up that particular look people gave when they felt sorry for someone, but not sorry enough to say anything about it. You've been on it for 10 minutes. Try being on it faster. Something hot climbed up the back of Della's throat. She swallowed it down, the way she swallowed everything else these days. Quietly. Efficiently. Like a woman who'd had a lot of practice. 9 days. Rent's due in 9 days, and I still haven't. Okay. Not now. Do the math later. Smile now. She delivered the plates, poured the coffee, said enjoy your meal to table 6 like she meant it, because some small, stubborn part of her still did. Behind her, one of the women at the corner booth leaned toward the other. Not quiet enough. He's always on her like that. Have you noticed never the other girls? Just her. Poor thing. Look at her hand. Yeah, wonder what happened there. Della heard it. She heard everything most days, the pity, the whispering, the small kindnesses people offered from a safe distance, because getting closer meant getting involved, and nobody wanted to get involved. She'd stopped waiting for someone to say something out loud a long time ago. At the register, Bernadette Hollis didn't look up from the receipts she was sorting. She didn't miss much either. 22 years behind that counter taught you how to watch a room without seeming to. He's in a mood, she murmured. When isn't he? Fair point. Bernadette slid a folded napkin across the counter inside it. 2 painkillers, the good kind, not the diner's watered-down aspirin. Take these on your break. Sit for 2 minutes. I'll cover the floor. Bernie, I can't. You can. I just gave you permission. A dry look, one eyebrow up. Man's had the personality of expired milk since the day I met him. Difference is the milk's improved with age. It almost got a laugh out of her. Almost. Della slipped the napkin into her apron pocket next to the photo she kept folded in there. Wren, gap-toothed 7 in the picture, though she was 8, now grinning like the whole world was made of good news. Della touched it without meaning to. A habit. A tether. Her phone buzzed once against her hip, half hidden under the apron. A 5-second gap between tables was all she had, so she used it. School nurse, Wren's a little wheezy today. Nothing urgent, just wanted you to know she's been using her rescue inhaler more than usual this week. Nothing urgent. She read it twice. Because nothing urgent was doing a lot of work in that sentence the way it always did when somebody was trying to be kind about bad news. Because the inhaler had 4 days left in it, 5. Maybe if Wren rationed it, the way an 8-year-old shouldn't have to know how to ration anything. Because the refill ran $31 with insurance, and Della had $14 in her checking account until Friday. She put the phone away, wiped down a table that didn't need wiping, counted the tips in her apron without meaning to enough for gas, maybe if she was careful. Not enough for both. You'll figure it out, she told herself. You always figure it out. It wasn't a lie exactly. It just wasn't a promise either. He was there by 7, like always. Della didn't know his name. Nobody seemed to. He came in most mornings, sat in the same corner booth, ordered the same thing. 2 eggs, wheat toast, coffee. Black, and read a newspaper he never seemed to actually turn the pages of. Older man. Composed in a way that had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with something quieter. Straight spine. Still hands. The kind of stillness that wasn't emptiness so much as restraint, a man who'd learned a long time ago exactly how much of himself to show a room. Morning, Della said, setting down his coffee. Morning. A small nod. Then, like most days, nothing more. Except today, his eyes lingered on her a beat too long. On the bandage. On the way she'd set the cup down with her right hand, only the left one held slightly apart from her body, as if it belonged to somebody else. Same as always, if you don't mind, he said. Course. He didn't smile exactly. But something in his face eased just slightly, a man deciding not to ask a question he already suspected he wouldn't like the answer to. Not yet, anyway. She moved on. He watched her go. He always did if anyone had bothered to notice. Nobody had. By 11, the lunch rush hit the way it always did, a wall of noise and orders and haunts that weren't enough. Della's arm ached from the elbow down, a deep, tired ache that had nothing to do with the bandage anymore, and everything to do with carrying twice the weight she should have, for twice as many hours as she should have. Della, the Hendersons' orders getting cold. Table 9. She reached for the tray. 4 plates, stacked heavy, balanced on her right arm, because her left still couldn't hold anything but its own weight. It wobbled. She caught it. Barely. Need a hand, Wade said, not moving from where he leaned against the counter. I've got it. You sure? Because from here, it looks like you've got 1 hand. Not 2. A short laugh aimed at no one and everyone. A couple at the counter glanced over, then quickly away, the way people do when watching feels safer than saying anything. Della didn't answer. She walked the tray to table 9, set it down without a rattle, and wore the smile that had started to feel less like an expression, and more like part of the uniform, something she put on with her apron every morning. Behind her, she heard him mutter something to the busboy. Low. Not meant for her. She caught it anyway. Half the write-ups on this floor are on her. Don't know why I keep her around. He keeps me around, she thought, stacking a bin of dirty dishes with more force than necessary, because I show up every single day and do the work of 2 people for the wage of 1, and he knows it. She didn't say it out loud. Saying it cost more than she had. Then just after noon, she turned too fast with a full pot of coffee, favored the bad hand, and without meaning, to the way her body had started doing on its own, like it was trying to protect something she couldn't afford to protect, and walked straight into Wade. The pot tipped. Coffee splashed across his shoes, the hem of his slacks, a dark bloom spreading over pressed gray fabric. The diner went quiet in that particular way. Diners go quiet. Forks paused mid-air. Conversation swallowed whole. Wade looked down at his shoes, then up at her. You did that on purpose. I didn't, Wade, I'm sorry. Sorry, let me just... She reached for the towel on the counter. He got there first, snatched it up before she could even that small act of fixing her own mistake was something he needed to take from her. Clumsy, he said low, just for her. Always so clumsy lately. Funny how that started right around the same time as... He stopped himself, smiled instead. The kind of smile with teeth in it. Never mind. He knows. He's talking about no. No, he wouldn't say it out loud. Not here. Not in front of, I'll get a new pot going, Della said, because saying anything else wasn't an option. Do that. Wade straightened his jacket voice, pitched to Carrie, now performing for the room the way he liked to. And Della, one more mess like this, and I start looking for someone with 2 working hands. This isn't a charity. It's a business. Somewhere behind her a customer muttered something that might have been, "That's enough, man." Wade didn't hear it. Or didn't care. He never did. Della knelt to clean up what was left, and for 1 second, one single unguarded second, her face stopped doing the work. It wasn't smiling. It wasn't fine. It was just tired. Just a woman on her knees in a diner holding a rag in a hand that still wasn't done healing. Doing math she couldn't outrun. 9 days. The inhaler. The copay. And now maybe if she wasn't careful, no job at all. Then she stood. Wipe at her hands. Put the smile back on because the next table was waiting and the next one after that. And the world didn't stop just because you needed it to. From the corner booth, Emmett Colson set his coffee down without drinking it. He'd watched the whole thing. The spill. The apology that came too fast, too smooth. The kind of apology that had clearly been given before to this exact man, more times than anyone should ever have to give it. The way Wade pulled the towel out of her hands instead of letting her use it. Not out of impatience, but because taking things from her seemed to be the entire point. But it wasn't the spill that stayed with him. It was the sound she'd made when she reached for that towel, small involuntary gone almost before it started. A flinch that came half a second too early. The kind a body learns not from 6 weeks of healing, but from something it's still afraid of. Emmett knew that sound. Knew the shape of it. The way it lived in the shoulders long before it ever reached the face. I thought of the story he'd overheard weeks back, second-hand, from a waitress who wasn't Della. Something about a wet floor. A bad step, an accident, nobody had seen happen. Simple. Forgettable. The kind of explanation that closes a conversation instead of opening one. He looked at the bandage again. At the careful way she held that hand apart from her body, like something borrowed she was afraid to damage further. A wet floor doesn't do that, he thought. Not like that. I didn't know her name yet. Not really, not beyond what he'd heard, shouted across a busy floor by a man who clearly relished shouting it. But he folded his newspaper, left his coffee half-finished, which he never did, and decided quietly the way he decided most things these days, that he was going to find out everything else. 3 days. That's how long it took for the diner to settle back into something like normal. Wade found new things to bark about: a fork out of place, a ticket rung up 30 seconds too slow. Della kept moving, kept smiling, kept doing the math in her head that never quite balanced no matter how many times she ran it. Until Tuesday afternoon when the back door slammed. Just wind. Just a delivery truck idling too close to the screen door, catching it before anyone could grab it first. But Della's whole body flinched hard, the tray in her hands rattling coffee, sloshing dangerously close to the rim before she caught it. Before she remembered to breathe. Because sounds like that took her somewhere else now. Somewhere she hadn't chosen to go. 6 weeks back. 6 weeks ago. The diner had emptied out the way it always did around 10, the last stragglers paying up the porch light, buzzing on outside the long fluorescent hush, settling over the counters once the customers were gone. Della had stayed to close. Marcy called in sick, and somebody had to do the side work, and somehow it was always her. Always had been since the day she started. She didn't mind it usually. There was something almost peaceful about the diner, after hours, chairs upside down, on tables. The smell of bleach, cutting through bacon, grease, her own footsteps, the only sound in the whole building. Except tonight, Wade was still there, which was strange. He never stayed past 9 unless there was a delivery to sign for, and there wasn't one on the schedule. His office light stayed on behind the frosted glass, a low yellow glow that usually meant paperwork. Invoices, the boring machinery of running a business. Della finished wiping down the counter, restocked the napkin dispensers, flipped the last chair onto the last table, and told herself she was just being tired. Just being the kind of tired where every small thing feels like a bigger thing than it is. Then she heard voices. Not loud, not meant to carry, just low enough, just urgent enough that something in her, some old instinct she didn't examine too closely, told her to stop moving. She should have kept walking. Should have grabbed her bag and gone straight out the front the way she did every other night. That's what she told herself later, over and over, lying awake, doing the thing where you replay a mistake until it wears a groove into you. Instead, she paused by the hallway. Just for a second. Long enough. Can't keep pulling from the same drawer every week, Wade. Somebody's gonna notice a pattern eventually. That wasn't Wade's voice. Older. Rougher. A voice Della didn't recognize, though something about it made her think of the parking lot. A car that idled out back. Sometimes engine running, windows tinted dark enough that you couldn't see who was inside. Nobody's noticing anything, Wade said. Flat, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. I've got the reports covering it. 20 here, 30 there. Diner runs on cash half the week. Who's gonna catch it? The owner, maybe, if he ever actually shows up. A short laugh. Ugly. That old man hasn't set foot behind this counter in years. Guy barely knows what year it is. I could rob this place blind, and he'd sign off on the numbers if I put a pen in his hand. Della's stomach dropped somewhere below the floor. Okay, that's not. You didn't hear that. You didn't hear anything. Just walk. Just get your bag and walk out the front door like a normal person on a normal night. Because whatever this is, it is not your business. It was never going to be your business, and And once we clear the next installment, we're square. I just need 6 more weeks of this working, the way it's working. 6 weeks. Square with who? Square for what? She should have already left. Should have been 3 steps toward the front door by now, purse on her shoulder. Car keys already finding her fingers, the way they did on autopilot every other night of her life. Instead, she was still standing there, frozen in a hallway that suddenly felt too narrow, too bright, too much like a place where sound traveled exactly as far as it shouldn't. Which was when the floor creaked under her weight. Small sound. Barely anything. Enough. The voices stopped. Della's heart did something violent in her chest, not just fast, but wrong, like it had forgotten the correct order of its own beats. She backed up 1 step, then another, quiet, careful. Telling herself there was still time, still a chance to be 3 tables away, wiping down a surface that was already clean by the time the office door opened. Wade stood in the frame, backlit by that low yellow light, and for 1 endless second, neither of them said anything at all. Della. Her name said like a question, said like he already knew the answer and hated it. What are you still doing here? Closing up. Marcy called out, so I... How long have you been standing there? Say nothing. Say you just got here. Say anything except the truth, because the truth is written all over your face right now. You can feel it. You can feel exactly how bad you are at hiding things. I was heading out. I didn't hear anything. I wasn't even... You weren't even what? He stepped into the hallway, closed the distance between them in a way that felt deliberate, unhurried, a man who already knew he had all the time in the world. Behind him, through the gap in the office door, Della caught a glimpse of someone else, a shape in the shadows, a jacket, a face turned away, too fast to make out. Gone before she could look properly. A door closing. Della. Wade's voice had dropped into something new, something quieter than his usual bark and so much worse for it. What exactly did you hear just now? Nothing. I swear I... Don't lie to me. Almost gentle. That was the terrible... How gentle. It sounded like he was disappointed in her rather than angry, like this was a small thing between reasonable people. I can see it on your face. You always were bad at this. Wade, please, I need to get home. Wren's got school in the... His hand shot out, closed around her wrist before she'd even registered that he'd moved. Let go your... You heard nothing, he said. Flat now, final. That's the only version of tonight that exists. Understand. You're hurting my... He twisted, 1 motion, sharp, complete. The sound came a half-second before the pain did small wrong. Nothing like she would have imagined a sound like that could be. Della heard herself make a noise that didn't feel like her own voice. Something torn loose from somewhere she didn't know she had. Her knees found the floor before she decided to kneel, the world narrowing down to the white-hot line running from her wrist up through her elbow. A pain so total it emptied out every thought in her head, except one. Wren. Who's going to take care of Wren if I can't? Wade crouched down. Not to help her up, just to be closer, just so the next part would land exactly where he wanted it to. Here's what happened tonight, he said, quiet, almost kind, which made it so much worse than shouting could have. You were mopping. Floor was wet by the fryer, you know how that spot gets. You slipped. Bad step. Nobody's fault, nobody to blame, just an accident, the kind that happens in kitchens all the time. Wade. That's the story. He let it sit there a moment. Let her understand. It wasn't a suggestion, wasn't a request, wasn't anything with a door on it. Because if it's not the story, If one single word about what you think you heard tonight finds its way anywhere near anyone, you don't just lose this job. You lose every job. I make calls, Della. This town's smaller than you think, and single moms with no references and a reputation for causing trouble don't exactly get their pick of second chances. Wren's face. That was the first thing that surfaced through the pain. Not the throbbing in her wrist, not the fear crawling up her spine, but Wren, gap-toothed and trusting, waiting at home for a mother who was supposed to be the one safe thing in her whole small world. I understand, Della whispered. Good girl. He straightened, adjusted his jacket like he'd just finished a perfectly ordinary conversation. Now get some ice on that. And Della, a pause, almost thoughtful. Smile a little more tomorrow. Wouldn't want the customers thinking something's wrong. He walked away, just like that. Like he hadn't just rearranged the entire architecture of her life in under 2 minutes, like his shoes weren't about to carry him straight out the front door to wherever men like Wade went at 11 at night, unbothered, untouched, carrying nothing home with them at all. Della stayed on the floor a long time after the bell over the door stopped ringing. She didn't cry. Not then. There wasn't room for it. Not with her wrist swelling by the second. Not with the drive home ahead of her, not with a sitter waiting who needed to be paid and thanked and sent off into the night without noticing anything was wrong. Crying was a luxury for later. For the shower, maybe, where the sound wouldn't travel. She drove home one-handed, jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached along with everything else. Every red light felt like a small mercy, a reason to stop moving, to breathe, to press her forehead against the steering wheel for exactly as long as the light allowed and not 1 second more. Okay. Think. You need a story. Wade already gave you one, use it. Wet floor, bad step. That's what happened. Say it enough times and it'll feel true. It has to feel true. Because if it doesn't, you don't have a job. And if you don't have a job... She didn't finish that thought. Some thoughts you didn't finish, not at 11 at night, not alone in a car, with a wrist already turning the color of a bruised plum. The porch light was on when she pulled in. Mrs. Alvarez, the sitter, met her at the door, with her coat already half-buttoned, already halfway to her own life, her own bed, her own ordinary Tuesday night. She went down easy tonight, Mrs. Alvarez said, then stopped. Della, honey, what happened to your hand? Kitchen thing. Wet floor. The lie came easier than she expected. Almost too easy, which was its own kind of frightening. I'm fine, really. Mrs. Alvarez didn't look convinced. But it was late, and this wasn't her business, and she had her own porch light to walk home to. She left with a worried glance over her shoulder that Della pretended not to see. Inside the house was quiet in the particular way a house is quiet when a child is finally fully asleep. Della checked on Wren anyway, always did every night, no matter how tired, no matter how late. Wren lay tangled in a blanket covered in cartoon planets. One arm flung above her head, mouth slightly open, breathing, the deep, unbothered breath of a kid who trusted completely that the world outside her bedroom door was safe, that her mother had it handled, that whatever happened out there, it stayed out there. Della stood in the doorway a long moment, cradling her ruined wrist against her chest. She can never know. Not the real version. Not until not ever, if I can help it. Because what happens to her, if I lose this job? What happens to us? There's no backup plan and sitting behind door number 2. There's just this. Just me. Just this paycheck. Just whatever I can hold together with tape and lies, and enough smiling to make it look like nothing's cracked underneath. She closed the door, went to the bathroom, turned the water on loud enough to cover whatever sound she might make. And there, finally alone with nobody left to perform for, she let herself cry. Quiet, controlled, the kind of crying you learn to do when you've never had the luxury of falling apart properly. 5 minutes, maybe less, long enough to empty something out. Not long enough to lose the thread of tomorrow morning, which was already waiting for her. Already demanding she show up, smiling with a story about a wet floor. She wrapped the wrist herself that night. Badly. It would take a trip to urgent care 2 days later, a trip she paid for in cash. She couldn't spare with a story about a wet floor that the doctor accepted without much question, because why wouldn't he? Before it was set properly, splinted, bandaged the way it looked now, 6 weeks later, still healing, still aching, still the first thing anyone noticed about her when she walked through that door every morning. Back in the present, the delivery truck pulled away from the curb outside. The screen door stopped banging. The ordinary noise of a Tuesday afternoon rushed back in around her. Someone laughing at the counter, the radio playing something upbeat and unbothered. The world moving on exactly the way it always did. Della realized she was still standing in the same spot tray, forgotten in her hands, staring at nothing. "Hey." Bernadette's voice gentle close. A hand on her shoulder, light as a question. "You went somewhere for a second there." "I'm fine." Bernadette didn't push. She never did, which was somehow worse, the way she just waited patient, like she had all the time in the world, and none of the judgment. "You know I've been doing this job a long time. 22 years. You learn to read people the way you read a menu fast, and mostly by the specials nobody wants to say out loud. Bernie, I'm not asking." A small, careful pause. "Just saying I'm here. Whenever the special's ready to talk about." Della managed something close to a smile. Not the performance kind. Something smaller, realer, gone almost as soon as it appeared. "Table 6 needs their check," she said instead. Bernadette watched her walk away, that same careful cataloging look she gave the register, at closing the one that missed nothing, forgave everything, and filed it all away for later. In the corner booth, Emmett Colson folded his newspaper without having read a single word of it. He'd watched the whole thing, the flinch at the door, the way Della had gone somewhere else entirely for nearly a full minute, eyes open, body present, everything else absent. He'd seen that look before a long time ago on faces that had learned to survive something by pretending for just long enough that it wasn't still happening to them. I thought of the diner as it used to be decades back now, though it felt closer some days than it had any right to. Laughter that didn't need permission. A woman behind that same counter, sleeves rolled to the elbow, calling out orders in a voice that filled the whole room without ever needing to be loud. What happened to this place, Ellie, he thought, and didn't finish the thought either, because some thoughts didn't need finishing. Some thoughts just sat there quiet and heavy, waiting for a man to decide what he was going to do about them. He left a 10 on the table for a $4 coffee. Didn't wait for change. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Emmett Colson left Ellie's diner, already thinking about tomorrow, about the office in the back, the ledgers. Nobody but Wade Kessler had touched in years, and a set of questions that had just stopped being optional. 4 days. That's how long it took for the rhythm of the diner to fold back around what had happened, the way it always did, the way it always would, because a diner didn't stop for anybody's Tuesday night, Wade barked. Della moved. The bell over the door kept ringing, and somewhere in all that ringing, a kind of fragile normal reassembled itself thin as ice over a pond nobody had bothered to test. Except Della noticed things now. Little things. The old man in the corner booth came in more often. Not just mornings anymore, sometimes lunch too, sometimes closing, always. With that same newspaper, he never seemed to actually read, always watching the floor, with an attention that had nothing to do with breakfast. She caught him once, mid-afternoon, staring at the register, the way you'd stare at a puzzle you were 3 pieces away from solving. Odd, she thought. Sweet, maybe. Or just lonely. Old men get lonely, that's probably all it is. Because that was easier to believe than the alternative, which was that somebody, anybody, might actually be paying attention. She'd stopped expecting that a long time ago. Expecting things only made the disappointment sharper when they didn't arrive. By Friday, the lunch rush had thinned into that dead hour. Diners get around 2 half-empty booths, the radio turned low, the smell of the fryer settling into something almost peaceful. Wade had gone to the bank, which meant for exactly 40 minutes, the whole building exhaled. Della found Bernadette in the back restocking napkin dispensers with the kind of unhurried precision she brought to everything, like the world could wait, exactly as long as she needed it to. Sit, Bernadette said, without looking up. I've got tables. 2 tables. Both regulars. Both patient. Sit. Della sat. Her wrist ached in that low, permanent way. It had started to. Not the sharp white pain of the first weeks, but something duller. Now, something that lived under the skin, and reminded her it was there every time she reached the wrong way, every time she forgot to protect it. Bernadette slid into the booth across from her, set down 2 coffees. Didn't say anything for a moment, which was its own kind of statement coming from a woman who filled every silence in this building with something dry and pointed. You've been quiet, Bernadette said, finally. I'm always quiet. No. A small shake of her head. You're always smiling. Different thing entirely. Smiling's a job requirement around here. Quiet's what happens underneath it when the smile gets tired of holding the whole weight by itself. Della wrapped both hands around her mug. Good hand doing most of the work the way it always did now. I'm fine, Bernie. Bernadette took a slow sip of her coffee, set it down with a small, deliberate click. You know, I've watched a lot of girls come through that door in 22 years. Watched most of them leave, too. Some quit. Some got fired for things that had nothing to do with what actually happened. And every single one of them, right before it all fell apart, they got quiet. Same as you. Something in Della's chest went very still. What are you saying? I'm saying. Bernadette leaned back. Looked at her, really looked the kind of look that peeled back a layer or 2, whether you wanted it to or not. I'm saying a wet floor doesn't put a hairline crack in someone's whole personality. I've mopped 1,000 wet floors in this place. Never once made me flinch every time a door slams. Della opened her mouth, closed it again. Deny it. Say wet floor again. Say it enough times and maybe it becomes true. Maybe, Bernie, I really can't. You don't have to tell me anything. Bernadette's voice softened just slightly, just enough to matter. I'm not asking you to. I'm just telling you something instead, because maybe it'll make the next part easier. She was quiet a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, lower, slower, the voice of someone stepping carefully onto ground she hadn't walked in a long time. 6 years ago, Bernadette said, I was you. 6 years ago. Bernadette Hollis had run the floor of this diner the way a good conductor runs an orchestra, not loud about it, Not showy, just sure. 16 years in by then. She'd trained half the waitstaff who'd come and gone since knew every regular's order before they sat down. Knew which booth caught the morning sun just right, and which one to steer the grumpy ones toward on a slow day. She'd been there when Eleanor still ran the place herself. Sleeves rolled up, laugh loud enough to carry into the parking lot. Eleanor had trusted her with the keys, sometimes actual keys. Actual trust, the kind that didn't get handed out twice in a lifetime. Then Eleanor got sick. Then Eleanor died. Then a quiet man named Emmett stopped coming in at all, and a company nobody quite understood sent down a new manager to run things, and everything shifted half a degree in a direction nobody could quite name yet. Wade Kessler had been polished back then. Charming even in the specific way men are charming right before you learn what the charm is covering up. He'd shaken Bernadette's hand the first week and told her the diner was lucky to have someone with her experience. She should have known. Compliments like that always came with an invoice attached eventually. It happened on a Thursday. She remembered that detail with a clarity that still surprised her. The exact day, the exact weather, a light rain that had kept the dinner crowd thin. She'd closed alone. Counted the drawer twice the way she always did, wrote the number down, locked it in the safe, the way she'd done 1,000 times before, without a single problem. The next morning, Wade called her into the office before the doors even opened. "We're short," he said. No greeting, just that flat and final sliding a printed sheet across the desk toward her, like evidence in a trial she hadn't known she was standing for. Short how much? $240. He watched her face while he said it. Watched it the way a man watches something he's testing for a reaction. "You closed last night." "I counted the drawer twice, Wade. It matched." "Well," a small, terrible shrug. "It doesn't match now." Bernadette had felt something cold slide down the back of her neck, settling somewhere between her shoulder blades and staying there. She thought about her granddaughter, 6 years old, that spring, living with her, since her daughter's life had come apart in ways too complicated and too private to explain to a stranger, needing shoes, needing a school lunch account, topped up, needing a grandmother with a job and a paycheck, and absolutely nothing that looked like a police record with the word theft anywhere near it. "I didn't take anything," she said. Steady. She'd always been steady. It was the thing she was proudest of some days, that nothing this job threw at her ever managed to shake the steadiness loose. "I believe you," Wade said, which even then, even young and green in his cruelty, he'd known how to say, with just enough warmth in it to sound almost sincere. But belief doesn't balance a register. And if this goes to corporate as an unexplained shortage under your name 20 years. Or not, that's the kind of thing that follows a person. Background checks, flag, things like that. New jobs go a little colder when they see it. My name. Not the drawers short. Not let's figure out what happened. Just immediately, cleanly your name. "What do you want, Wade?" He'd smiled then. Small, satisfied. A man who'd gotten exactly where he meant to go. "I want this handled quietly," he said. "You step back from the lead position. Keep your job. Keep your hours reasonable. No paperwork goes anywhere. It doesn't need to go. Everybody's happy. Everybody except me. You keep your job," he said again, like that settled it. Like a job with the heart cut out of it was still functionally a job. She'd wanted to fight it. God, some nights she still dreamed about the version of herself who fought it, who marched into corporate, who called a lawyer who did something other than nod and swallow and go back out onto the floor with her apron on, like nothing underneath her ribs had just been quietly dismantled. But there'd been a 6-year-old asleep in her spare room. A daughter 3 states away who couldn't help a checking account that didn't have room in it for the word unemployed, let alone the word unemployable. So she'd nodded. And for 6 years, Bernadette Hollis, who used to run this floor like she owned a piece of it, had bussed tables and refilled coffee, and watched quietly cataloging as one girl after another cycled through Wade Kessler's particular brand of attention. Never saying anything. Never able to. Until now. I should have said something back then, Bernadette said, present tense, pulling her voice back into the booth, back into the thin afternoon light of the diner. Should have found a way. Instead, I just got small. Learned how to disappear a little. Right there in plain sight, refilling coffee cups and keeping my head down, and telling myself that was the smart thing, the safe thing. You had a kid depending on you, Della said quiet. So do you. The words landed between them and just sat there. Nobody rushed to fill the space after. I'm not telling you this so you feel sorry for me, Bernadette said eventually. I'm telling you because 6 years is a long time to watch a man get away with things, and somewhere along the way, I stopped believing anybody could stop him, including me. Her eyes found Della's steady clear. But you're not me 22 years deep with a granddaughter, and no savings and no fight left. You're still early enough in this to matter. And I think for the first time in longer than I want to admit, I think somebody might actually be paying attention. The old man, Della said, before she'd fully decided to say it out loud. Bernadette's mouth curved just slightly. The old man, she agreed. I don't know what he's doing here so often lately, but I know what watching looks like, Della. I spent 6 years perfecting it, and that man isn't just having his eggs. For the first time in 6 weeks, something in Della's chest loosened. Not hope exactly, she wasn't ready to call it. That wasn't sure she trusted the word anymore. But something smaller. Something like not alone. Bernie. Her voice cracked slightly on the name. If I tell you what actually happened to my hand, you don't have to. I know. Della looked down at the bandage, worn soft now, at the edges from weeks of handling. I want to. And so, in the last quiet minutes before the lunch rush found its second wind in a booth that had absorbed 40 years of other people's secrets without ever once repeating them, Della told her. All of it. The voices in the hallway. The name she hadn't caught. The sound her own wrist had made small and wrong before the pain arrived to explain it. The story about the wet floor that she'd repeated so many times now, it sometimes felt more real than the truth underneath it. Bernadette listened without interrupting. Her jaw tightened somewhere around the middle of it, the only sign, otherwise, so still, so composed, that anything underneath was moving at all. When Della finished, Bernadette reached across the table, took her good hand, held it. Okay, she said. Just that. Like a door quietly closing on one version of things, and another one just as quietly easing open. Emmett Colson had not set foot in the back office of Ellie's Diner in 11 years. He remembered the last time with a clarity that surprised him, the way certain memories stayed sharp while whole decades around them softened into blur. He'd come in to sign the paperwork handing daily operations over to the management company 3 weeks after the funeral, still moving through the world, like a man wearing someone else's coat sleeves, 2 long buttons in the wrong places. He remembered signing his name and not quite recognizing his own handwriting. Remembered locking the door behind him and standing in the parking lot a long moment before he could make his legs carry him to the car. He hadn't planned to come back tonight. Not really. He'd told himself driving over after close that he was simply going to look. That looking wasn't the same as deciding anything. The key still worked. That surprised him more than it should have, 11 years, and nobody had thought to change the locks on a door that led to the financial guts of the entire business. Or maybe somebody had thought about it and simply hadn't bothered, because why would the old man, who never came around, ever need to get back in? The diner at night was a different animal than the diner by day. Chairs stacked on tables. The hum of refrigeration units the only sound besides his own footsteps. Streetlight coming through the front windows in long orange bars across the floor. The same floor Eleanor used to mop herself some nights, humming something off-key, telling him it was the only thinking time she got all day. He walked past the counter, past the wall where photographs used to hang regulars caught mid-laugh, the two of them, cutting a ribbon the day they opened a Polaroid gone soft with age of Eleanor, holding up the first dollar they ever made, framed like it mattered because it had. That wall was bare now, just a rectangle of slightly less faded paint where something used to live. You'd hate what this place has become, Ellie, he thought. You'd have had that man out on the sidewalk in under a week. You never did have patience for cruelty, not even the quiet kind. He let himself into the office. It was smaller than he remembered. Or he was bigger in the memory than he was in the doorway, now hard to say which. A desk that wasn't the one they'd bought together second-hand from a bank that was closing down in '89. A filing cabinet, metal gray, the kind that came from an office supply catalog and nowhere else, nothing personal about it at all. The top drawer was locked. He tried 3 keys before the fourth one gave an old habit-worn brass key from a ring he'd kept for reasons he'd never quite examined too closely. The drawer rolled open with a metallic groan loud enough to make him freeze, breath-held, listening. Nothing. Just the hum of refrigeration. Just an old man standing alone in a room that used to hold all his hope in one place. He exhaled, kept going. The first folder he pulled was thick. D. Voss. The tab read block letters, the kind of handwriting that pressed too hard into the paper. Like the person writing it needed the pen to know exactly how they felt. He opened it under the thin beam of a small flashlight, careful to keep the glow low away from the frosted glass of the door. Right up after right up. Dates stacked close together, sometimes 2 in a single week, sometimes 3. Subordinate attitude with customers. Repeated tardiness. Failure to follow proper food safety protocol. Each one signed, each one dated, each one building a tidy little tower of evidence toward some conclusion. Emmett didn't need much imagination to guess at. Except, he frowned. Flipped back 2 pages. Compared dates against a mental calendar he was rebuilding as he went cross-referencing, against something that had been nagging at him for days now. The mornings he'd come in and watched Della work a full shift, competent, careful, apologizing for things that weren't her fault, before anyone even asked her to. One write-up was dated for a Sunday. He was almost certain, close to certain, the kind of certain that made his stomach tighten. Della didn't work Sundays. Hadn't for weeks. He'd heard her mention it once in passing to another server. Something about her daughter's school schedule. So which is it? Thought. Did she work a shift that doesn't exist? Or does this whole file exist for a reason that has nothing to do with the truth at all? He kept reading. The language repeated itself in strange, telling ways, the same phrases almost word for word showing up across write-ups, supposedly written weeks apart, careless, unreliable. A pattern of concerning behavior. Real complaints, the kind that accumulated organically over months of actual incidents, didn't usually sound quite this uniform, quite this rehearsed. This wasn't written over 6 weeks. Emmett thought something cold and clear settling into place behind his ribs. This was written in one sitting. Somebody sat down and built a paper trail, backdated it, and called it history. He set the folder aside. Kept it. He'd need it later, whatever later was going to look like. And reached for the next thing that caught his eye. A slim green ledger, the old-fashioned kind, tucked behind a row of hanging files, like someone hadn't quite trusted it to a computer. Weekly totals, register counts. He ran his finger down the column, doing the kind of math that used to be second nature to him, back when this business had been his whole life, instead of a place he visited in disguise. The numbers didn't lie, but they also didn't quite add up. Small discrepancies, $30, 1 week, $40, the next, never enough to trigger any alarm on its own. Never consistent enough in amount to look deliberate to anyone not specifically looking for a pattern. But Emmett had built spreadsheets by hand once, decades before spreadsheets existed as anything but graph paper and a steady hand. He knew what a pattern looked like, even when it was trying very hard not to be one. Weekly, he thought. Small enough to explain away. Consistent enough to add up to something over time. He flipped further back. Found an invoice folder, thick with receipts from a supply company he didn't recognize, not the one Eleanor had used for 30 years. The reliable outfit 2 towns over that had never once shorted them a case of anything. This one had a different name, different letterhead. Prices that ran high, suspiciously high, for basic paper goods and cleaning supplies that should have cost half as much. He turned one invoice toward the flashlight, angling it until he could read the signature line at the bottom. M. Doss. The name meant nothing to him. Not yet. But something about the handwriting, hurried, slanted the kind of signature that belonged to a man who signed a great many things. He didn't want, traced too carefully, made the back of Emmett's neck prickle in a way he'd learned over nearly 70 years of living not to ignore. I photographed 3 invoices with the phone Della had helped him figure out how to use months ago in a conversation he now suspected she didn't even remember. He photographed the ledger. He photographed 2 pages from the file marked D. Voss, careful to capture the dates, the repeated language, everything he'd need later to prove what his gut already understood. Then a sound. The front door. The distinctive scrape of the bell above it, muffled but unmistakable through the office wall. Emmett's whole body went still. Somebody's here. Somebody's here at what, past 11. Nobody comes in past 11, except he killed the flashlight. Slid the folder back into the drawer, not perfectly, not with the care he'd normally take, just fast, just back his old hands, moving with an urgency he hadn't asked of them in years. He eased the drawer shut, turned the lock, held his breath in a way that made his chest ache, an old man's lungs unused to this particular kind of exertion. Footsteps out on the floor. Slow. Unhurried. A light switching on somewhere near the counter, thin gold spilling under the office door. If that's him. If Wade walks in here right now and finds me standing in his office at midnight, think of something. You're the owner. You can say you're the owner. Except, then it's over. Then the whole plan is over before it even started. Then he knows. Then he has time to clean it all up before you can prove a single. The footsteps paused. Somewhere close. Close enough that Emmett could hear faintly the specific rhythm of somebody checking something. A lock, maybe, or a light switch. The ordinary motions of a person doing an ordinary late-night task with no idea at all that a stranger stood 4 feet away, holding his breath in the dark. Then the footsteps moved on. A door in the back, the walk-in maybe, or the supply closet. A pause. The clink of something being moved, checked, replaced. Then the front bell again. The door. Silence. Emmett let his breath out, slow, careful, a full minute passing before he trusted his legs to carry him anywhere at all. Close, he thought. Too close. He let himself out through the back, the way he'd come in, locking the door behind him, with hands that hadn't quite stopped shaking. Stood in the parking lot a long moment, the same way he had 11 years ago, letting the night air do whatever work it could toward settling something that didn't feel remotely settled. He looked back once at the building, at the dark windows, at the bare wall where Eleanor's photographs used to hang. I know what you'd tell me to do, he thought. You'd tell me to march back in there tomorrow and end this before breakfast. Give me a little more time, Ellie. I need to be sure I get it right. Wade noticed the drawer first, not because it looked disturbed. Emmett had been careful as a man his age with hands that didn't move the way they used to, could manage to be. But Wade had a particular relationship with that drawer, the kind of relationship a man develops with anything that could end him. He checked it the way some people checked a pulse. Reflexive, constant. And Monday morning, running his thumb along the lock the way he always did, he felt something. A hesitation, maybe. A give where there shouldn't be one. Probably nothing, he told himself, opening it, running his eyes over the files. Everything appearing at a glance exactly where it should be. Except the ledger sat a half-inch to the left of where he always left it. And Wade Kessler was not by nature or by necessity a man who left things a half-inch anywhere. He stood there a moment longer than the situation seemed to warrant, staring into a drawer that looked by every reasonable measure completely undisturbed. Then he closed it, locked it, told himself it was nothing. Wade told themselves a great many things, right up until the moment those things stopped being true. But that afternoon, he called Merrick. We need to talk, he said, low, stepping out the back door into the alley phone, pressed tight against his ear, like the words might slip out and be overheard by the dumpsters. You're breaking up my afternoon for a feeling. Merrick's voice came through flat, unimpressed, the particular boredom of a man who'd built a career out of not panicking. You said the books were clean. You said nobody's looking. Nobody was looking. I'm just saying. You're just saying nothing, Wade. That's what you're saying. A drawer's not a person. A half-inch isn't a witness. A pause. And when Merrick spoke again, something colder had slid into his voice, something with teeth in it. What I need from you is the next installment. On time. We've got a schedule, and schedules don't bend because you're feeling jumpy about a filing cabinet. I know the schedule. Then act like it. A beat. You've got a girl on your floor who already knows too much. You handled that. Handle whatever. This is the same way, quiet, quick, and before it becomes a problem instead of a feeling. You understand me? Wade didn't answer right away. Somewhere behind him, through the propped door, he could hear the ordinary sounds of the diner going on without him. Dishes laughter, the radio playing something upbeat that had absolutely nothing to do with the ice sliding slowly down his spine. Yeah, he said finally. I understand. He hung up, stood in the alley a moment longer, jaw tight, eyes narrowed against the afternoon sun. Somebody's watching this place, he thought. I can feel it. Like a draft under a door you can't find. He thought of the old man in the corner booth. Thought of him specifically for the first time, not as background noise, but as a variable. The way he lingered too long some mornings. The way his eyes tracked the floor a little too carefully for a man supposedly absorbed in his eggs and his newspaper. No, Wade told himself. He's just an old man. Old men don't do anything but sit and remember better days. But the thought stayed with him, The rest of the shift low and persistent, a splinter he couldn't quite locate to pull out. When he passed the corner booth that evening, the old man looked up, held his gaze a beat too long, nodded, polite, unreadable. "Evening," Emmett said. "Evening." Wade answered and kept walking, telling himself it meant nothing at all. But some part of him, some old animal part that had kept him one step ahead of consequences. His whole life had already started running the numbers on how much time he had left before something he couldn't control found its way to the surface. He just didn't know yet how little time that actually was. The phone buzzed at 1:47 in the morning, and Wade Kessler already knew before he even looked at it exactly who it was, because nobody texted at 1:47 in the morning with good news. Nobody who mattered anyway. Deadline moved up. Friday. Not negotiable. He stared at the ceiling of his apartment a long time after that. The streetlight outside, bleeding orange, through blinds he'd never bothered to fix properly. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's television murmured through the wall, some rerun laughing at a joke Wade would never hear the setup for. Friday. 3 days. Okay, think. You've got the register skim, that's what maybe 600, if you're careful about it. If nobody's counting close enough to notice. Which leaves you short. Which leaves you exactly the kind of short that gets a man's kneecaps discussed in a conversation he doesn't get invited to. He sat up, pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes until colors bloomed behind them, until the number in his head, the number that never quite stopped scrolling somewhere in the back of his skull, day and night, a ticker tape of consequences stopped screaming quite so loud. Because it had started small. That was the part nobody believed later when men like Wade tried to explain themselves. It had started with a Tuesday night poker game, a few $100s. The kind of loss that felt like nothing at the time, easily made back next week. Except next week never quite covered it. And the week after covered less. Until the number wasn't a number anymore, it was a weight sitting on his chest at 1:47 in the morning, making it hard to remember what breathing used to feel like before all this. He thought of the old man in the corner booth. Thought of him with a cold, crawling unease he couldn't fully name. It's nothing. He's just an old man. Old men read newspapers and drink bad coffee and go home to nap, that's all that is. Except the drawer. Except the half-inch. Except you've felt eyes on the back of your neck for 2 straight weeks now, and you don't get feelings like that over nothing. You never have. It's the one thing that's kept you ahead of every mess you've ever made. His phone buzzed again. Handle her. Quiet. Before Friday. Wade set the phone face down on the nightstand. Didn't sleep again that night. Just lay there, doing math that never balanced, building slowly in the dark. The way certain decisions get built. A plan that had a woman's name attached to it. And absolutely nothing to do with fairness. Emmett Colson hadn't opened the trunk in the back of his closet in 11 years. I knew that precisely, not because he'd counted, but because the last time he'd touched it was the week after the funeral, when a well-meaning niece had suggested gently that maybe it was time to go through Eleanor's things. He'd shut the lid so fast that day he'd nearly caught his own fingers in it. Told the niece politely that he wasn't ready. 11 years. Apparently he still wasn't ready. But something about the office 2 nights back, the smell of it, the particular hush of a building after hours, the ghost of a woman who used to fill every square inch of that place with noise had loosened something in him that he hadn't expected to loosen. So he found himself on a Wednesday evening. He hadn't planned kneeling on his bedroom floor in front of an old cedar trunk, working the latch, with hands that shook slightly, for reasons that had nothing to do with age. The lid came up. The smell hit him. First cedar, and under it faint, impossibly still, there, after all this time. Something that might have been her perfume, or might have just been memory doing what memory does, filling in details that time should have erased. An apron sat on top. Her apron. Pale blue, a coffee stain near the hem that had never quite washed out her name, stitched crooked across the chest in thread. She'd done herself because she'd insisted back when they opened that store-bought aprons never fit right, and she wasn't about to spend 40 years of mornings in something that pinched. He held it a long moment. Didn't put it on. Just held it the fabric soft and worn thin at the pocket where she'd kept her order pad, her pen a peppermint, for any kid who came in looking nervous about their first restaurant meal. Underneath photographs, a menu hand-lettered the corners gone soft, a framed dollar bill, the first one they'd ever made, which he'd matted himself in a $5 frame from the drugstore, because that was all they could afford that first year. And Eleanor had told him, it didn't matter. It was still the most beautiful thing either of them owned. He sat back against the bed frame. Let himself remember properly for the first time in longer than he wanted to admit. You want to know the secret, she used to say, standing at the door every single morning before the lunch crowd hit greeting the regulars by name and learning the strangers before they left. Nobody's a stranger in this place, not after they've eaten at my counter. You learn somebody's name, you learn they matter. And once you know somebody matters, it's a whole lot harder to treat them like they don't. She'd said it like a joke half the time. But she'd meant it dead serious, and Emmett had watched her live it out for 40 years, remembering a trucker's daughter's birthday, comping a coffee for a woman crying quietly in a booth after a doctor's appointment. Gone wrong. Learning the exact way old Mr. Petrosky liked his eggs so she never had to ask twice. This place was never really about the food, Emmett thought, sitting on his bedroom floor with her apron still folded in his lap. It was about that. About somebody. Anybody. Walking in feeling invisible, and walking out feeling seen. He thought of Della, of the bandage, of the flinch that came half a second too early. And now a man like Wade Kessler is standing in the exact spot where you used to stand, Ellie, doing the exact opposite of everything you ever built. Something hardened in Emmett's chest. Not anger exactly, something steadier than anger. Something that had been quietly assembling itself for 2 weeks and had finally tonight found its shape. I let this place go quiet after you left, he thought. Let it run on its own, because looking at it too closely hurt more than I could stand. But I'm looking now, Ellie. And I'm not looking away again. He folded the apron carefully, set it aside, not back in the trunk, but on the chair by his bed, where he'd see it first thing in the morning. Then he picked up the folder he'd photographed 2 nights before, spread the images across his kitchen table late into the night, cross-referencing dates, comparing the invoice signatures against the ledger entries, building. Slowly, methodically, the way a man builds something when he's finally got a reason worth the effort. A case. By midnight, he had 3 things he was certain of. 1, the write-ups against Della Voss were fabricated, written in a single sitting, and backdated to look like a pattern that never existed. 2, the supply company billing under the name M. Doss was charging nearly double the market rate for goods that barely showed up in the walk-in, which meant somebody was pocketing the difference, and that somebody had a signature that matched invoices going back at least 14 months. 3, and this was the one that kept him up longest, turning the thought over and over, like a stone he couldn't quite skip right. Somebody at that diner was about to get hurt worse than a broken wrist unless he moved fast enough to stop it. He picked up his phone, found the number for an old friend, a retired detective he hadn't spoken to in 3 years, and typed out a message he'd rewrite 4 times before sending. "Need your help with something? Won't take much of your time. It matters." The reply came back within the hour, because that's the kind of friend a man keeps for 40 years if he's lucky. "Whatever you need, Emmett. Just say when." He set the phone down, looked at Eleanor's apron on the chair pale blue in the lamplight. Soon, he thought. I promise you. Soon. Wade found his opening on Thursday. The lunch rush hit hard that day. A bus tour had stopped in unexpectedly. 40 extra bodies crowding into booths meant for half that many. Every server on the floor moving at a pace that left no room for noticing anything beyond the next order, the next table, the next fire that needed putting out. Della had her hands full. Literally 4 plates balanced against her good arm, weaving between tables with the particular focus of a woman who didn't have room in her head for anything except the next 30 seconds. Which was exactly what Wade had been waiting for. He slipped into the break room while she was 3 tables deep in the chaos, her bag hanging on its usual hook by the lockers. Unattended, unwatched. Exactly where it always hung during a shift, because nobody thought twice about a coworker's bag in a break room. That was the whole point. Trust didn't announce itself. It just sat there quietly on a hook, waiting to be used against you. He'd counted the bills already back in his car that morning. $240, the same number deliberately as the shortage he'd blame on Bernadette all those years ago. Because there was a rhythm to numbers like that, a believability. A man could get careless if he tried to be too original. In, out. 30 seconds. Nobody's even. The door creaked. Wade froze Bill half tucked into the inner pocket of Della's bag, heart slamming so hard against his ribs he could feel it in his teeth. Bernadette stood in the doorway. For one endless second, neither of them moved. Her eyes flicked to his hand, to the bag, back to his face. "Forgot my keys," she said slowly. Too slowly. "In my locker." "Right." Wade straightened, sliding the bag back onto its hook, with a casualness he had to manufacture from nothing. "Just checking the lost and found box. Thought I saw something of hers fall out earlier." Bernadette didn't answer right away, just looked at him. That same cataloging look she gave the register at closing the one that filed everything away without comment. "Funny," she said, finally crossing to her locker, pulling out a set of keys that had clearly been sitting there the whole time. An excuse, and nothing more. "I didn't see anything fall. Must have missed it." Must have. She left without another word. Wade stood alone in the break room a moment longer, pulse still hammering, telling himself it didn't matter. She hadn't seen enough to matter. There was nothing to see even if she had. She's just an old waitress with too much time to notice things that aren't her business. Except some part of him. The same part that had felt eyes on his neck for 2 weeks straight. Didn't quite believe that. Not anymore. He checked the bag one more time. Bill tucked deep in the inside pocket, exactly where a search would find it, and exactly where a woman going about her normal day would never think to look. Then he walked back out onto the floor, straightened his tie, and smiled at a table of tourists like a man with nothing weighing on him at all. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow, this ends. Her problem. Not mine. Friday came in gray and overcast, the kind of morning that made the diner's lights feel warmer by comparison. Gold and low against a sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain. Della didn't know yet. That was the cruelest part looking back on it later, how ordinary the morning felt right up until it wasn't. She'd kissed Wren goodbye at the bus stop, watched the yellow doors swallow her daughter up with a wave that Wren barely returned already, deep in conversation with a friend already living the particular freedom of an 8-year-old who trusted completely that the world had her handled. She's got no idea, Della thought, driving to work with the radio low, what it costs some mornings to make sure she never has to know. The lunch rush hit around 11:30. Della moved through it, the way she always did now, competent, efficient, the ache in her wrist a low hum she'd learned to work around rather than through. Then, at exactly 12:15, Wade stepped out from behind the register with a clipboard in his hand, and an expression Della had never seen on him before. Not anger. Something colder than anger. Something performed. "Everybody stop what you're doing for a second," he said. Loud. Deliberately loud, pitched to carry across the whole floor over the clatter of forks and the low murmur of 40 conversations. "We've got a problem," the diner quieted the way rooms do when someone announces a problem in a voice built for an audience. "Register's short again," Wade continued. "Second time this month. And this time, I'm not letting it slide." Della felt her stomach drop, though she couldn't have said why. Some animal instinct, some part of her that had learned 6 weeks and 1 broken wrist ago. Exactly what Wade Kessler sounded like right before he did something irreversible. "Not you. This isn't about you. You didn't take anything, so this can't be—" "I want everyone's bags checked," Wade said. "Right now. Nobody leaves the floor until we clear this up." A ripple went through the staff, confused glances, a few nervous laughs that died fast when nobody joined in. Bernadette's eyes found Della's across the room, and Della saw something flicker there. Not confusion. Fear. "Wade, this is—" one of the bus boys started. "Everyone," Wade repeated, not raising his voice, not needing to. He started with the lockers on the far end, methodical performative opening bag after bag, while customers at nearby tables slowly stopped eating to watch forks paused mid-air. The particular hush of a diner, realizing it was about to witness something it hadn't paid for. Della's hands had gone cold. She didn't understand why exactly she knew what she hadn't done, knew it with total certainty, and yet some deep, exhausted part of her had learned over the last 6 weeks that being right and being safe were 2 entirely different things. Wade reached her locker last. Of course he did. Of course he saved this for "this one's yours," he said. Not a question. Yes. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Go ahead." He unzipped the bag with a slowness that felt engineered, felt like it was meant to stretch every second into something that could be watched, absorbed, remembered by every witness in the room. His hand went to the inside pocket, came out holding a folded stack of bills. The diner went absolutely silent. $240, Wade said, holding it up like evidence in a trial that had already been decided before it started. "In your bag, Della. Care to explain that?" No, that's not. I didn't. I have never once in my life. That's not mine. I don't know how that got. It's a lot of money to not know about. Wade's voice carried cold and clean across a room that had gone so quiet Della could hear her own pulse hammering in her ears. "Same amount, funny enough, as what's been disappearing from this register for weeks. Wade, I swear to you, I have never taken a single dollar from—" "Save it." He turned, addressing the room now, performing for an audience of strangers with their forks frozen halfway to their mouths. "Folks, I'm sorry about this. Truly. I know nobody wants to see this kind of thing while they're trying to enjoy their lunch. But I've got a responsibility to run this business honestly, and I take that seriously even when it's hard. Even when it means catching someone I genuinely liked. He's lying. He's lying, and everyone in this room is watching him lie, and nobody can see it, because he's so good at—" Della's eyes swept the room without meaning to. Found the two women in the corner booth, the same ones from weeks ago, watching now, with a different expression than pity. Something closer to judgment. The particular cruelty of strangers deciding in real time who deserved sympathy and who didn't. Found a family at table 9, a mother quietly pulling her kids' attention back to their plates, not wanting them to watch whatever was about to happen next. Found nobody anywhere standing up for her. "Ren, what happens to Ren if I'm calling the police?" Wade said. "Wade, please, just let me explain. Let me. You had your chance to explain when I asked you." He was already reaching for the phone at the register, already halfway through a performance he'd clearly rehearsed a dozen times in his head. "Now it's out of my hands. That's enough." The voice cut through the diner like something physical. Not loud. Not shouted. But carrying a weight that made every other sound in the room seem to fall away from it. The way water pulls back from a stone, dropped into still air. Every head turned. Emmett Coulson rose from his corner booth, slowly, deliberately. The newspaper he'd carried every single day for 2 weeks, sliding unnoticed off the table and onto the floor, forgotten for the first time since anyone could remember. I was not a large man, not imposing in any obvious way, just an old man, in a worn jacket straight-backed, still his eyes fixed on Wade with an intensity that made the younger man's confident performance falter just slightly, for the first time all afternoon. "Wade," Emmett said, his voice quiet, now quiet, in a way that somehow carried further than the shouting had. "Before you make that call, I think there's something you and I need to discuss." Wade's hand hovered over the phone. Something crossed his face, the first crack Della had ever seen in it, a flicker of uncertainty that hadn't been there a moment before. "This isn't your business, old-timer," he said, but his voice had lost its edge. Just slightly. Just enough that Della, watching, felt something shift in the air of the whole room. Emmett took one step forward, then another, unhurried, certain. "Actually," he said, "it's very much my business." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a folder, worn at the corners, thick with photographs and printed pages, the accumulation of 2 weeks spent in shadows nobody had thought to notice, and set it deliberately on the counter between them. "I think," Emmett said, "it's time we talked about what's really been disappearing from that register, and who's really been doing the taking." The diner held its breath. Wade looked down at the folder, then up at Emmett's face, really looked for the first time at a man he'd dismissed for 2 weeks as nothing more than background noise, an old fixture in a corner booth. Something in his expression shifted. Recognition, maybe, or the first cold edge of fear. "Who are you?" he asked, and his voice, for the first time in longer than anyone at Ellie's diner could remember, actually shook. "My name," Emmett said, "is Emmett Coulson." He let it sit there a moment. Let the room absorb it the way a room absorbs weather slowly, then all at once. "And I own this diner." Nobody moved. Not the tourists frozen mid-bite at table 9. Not the 2 women in the corner booth, mouths slightly open, forks forgotten. Not Della, standing at the edge of the counter, with $240 in a stranger's story, still hanging around her neck, like a noose nobody had finished tying. Wade laughed. Short, ugly. The kind of laugh a man makes when he's trying to convince a room of something his own face isn't selling. "That's..." He shook his head. "That's a joke. Right, some kind of joke. I built this place with my wife," Emmett said, and his voice didn't rise, didn't need to, cutting through Wade's laugh, the way cold water cuts through everything it touches. 40 years ago. Poured concrete for that floor myself. Hung that sign out front with my own 2 hands. The week before it fell down in a storm, and hung it right back up the week after, because Eleanor said a diner that gives up on its own name after one bad storm doesn't deserve customers. He gestured small toward the bare rectangle on the wall, the one where photographs used to live. That's her name on the sign. Ellie's. Not a marketing choice. Her name. Something moved across Wade's face, the particular collapse of a man watching the ground he'd been standing on turn out to be considerably thinner than advertised. You can't just... I can, Emmett said. And I have. For 2 weeks now, actually. Which is longer than you'd like, I imagine. He's been here the whole time. Della felt the thought land somewhere behind her sternum cold and clarifying. The corner booth. The eggs. The newspaper he never turned the pages of. He wasn't just an old man killing time. I was watching. He's been watching this whole 2 weeks, she repeated out loud before she'd fully decided to say it. Emmett turned to her, and for the first time since she'd started working this floor, his eyes held nothing guarded in them at all. 2 weeks, he confirmed, gentle now, gentler than she'd heard anyone speak to her in longer than she could remember. I'm sorry it took me that long to see what was happening under my own roof, Della. I should have been paying closer attention a long time before this. Wade's hand had drifted back toward the phone at the register, some last desperate reflex, the animal instinct of a cornered man reaching for the only weapon he had left. This doesn't change anything, he said, voice climbing brittle now around the edges. She still had the money in her bag. I don't care who you are, that's evidence that's... Is it... Emmett opened the folder, set the first page on the counter between them, turning it so the room, not just Wade, could see it. Because I've got 14 months of write-ups here, Wade dated across weeks. Della didn't even work. Same phrases over and over. Careless, unreliable. Written like a man, copying his own homework, because he couldn't be bothered to make the lies sound different from each other. He set down a second page. And I've got a ledger. Small shortages every week going back further than I want to think about. $30 here, $40 there. Nothing big enough to notice on its own. Everything added up big enough to matter. A third page. And invoices, Emmett said, from a supply company charging double the going rate for paper goods that never once showed up in the walk-in cooler in the amounts being billed. Signed by a man named M. Doss. He looked up, steady, unblinking. I don't suppose you'd care to tell this room who that is. The color had gone entirely out of Wade's face now. Not pale, something past pale. Something closer to the color of a man doing math he already knew the ending to. You don't understand, he said, and his voice had dropped urgent, now almost pleading, aimed only at Emmett, like the rest of the room had simply ceased to exist. You don't know who I owe. What happens if I don't? I don't need to know, Emmett said. That's not my problem to solve. It never was. Outside faint at first, then unmistakable, the low wail of a siren growing, curling around the corner of the block. He called someone, Della thought. Heart hammering, somewhere new, now somewhere closer to disbelief than fear. He already called someone. This wasn't just him walking over and hoping for the best. He planned this. Wade heard it too. His whole body went rigid, eyes flicking toward the front door, toward the back exit, toward every possible escape. A cornered man's mind maps out in half a second flat. Don't. Emmett said quietly, not moving, not raising a hand, just standing there, with the calm, immovable weight of a man who'd already thought 3 steps past whatever Wade was thinking now. Running makes this worse. For you, I mean. Not for anyone else in this room. The bell above the door rang. 2 officers stepped through it. Behind them, an older man in a plain jacket, silver at the temples, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd walked into 100 rooms exactly like this one and never once needed to raise his voice to be heard. "Emmett," the man said, nodding once. "Ray." Emmett nodded back. "Appreciate you getting here quick. 28 years on the force, you learn, which calls to take seriously." Ray's eyes moved to Wade, cataloging him in one slow sweep, the sweat at his collar, the way his hands wouldn't sit still. This our guy. This is our guy. What happened next took less time than Della would have believed possible, for something that felt like it rearranged the entire shape of her life. The younger officer, Detective Ortiz, according to the badge, Della caught a glimpse of as he passed and weighed his rights in a flat, practiced voice, while Wade stood there, mouthing something that might have been a protest, might have just been air escaping a man who'd run out of moves. His hands went behind his back. The cuffs closed with a small metallic click that seemed somehow louder than everything else that had happened all afternoon combined. "This is insane," Wade said to nobody, to everybody. "You people don't understand what you're—" The bell above the door rang again. A man Della didn't recognize stepped through it. Mid-40s jacket, too nice for the neighborhood. A duffel bag, slung over one shoulder, that he was already starting to lower onto a chair before he'd fully registered the two uniformed officers standing 4 feet away. He froze. "Merrick Doss," Detective Ortiz asked, already crossing toward him, already reaching for the second set of cuffs, clipped to his belt. The color drained out of Merrick's face in real time. A slow-motion collapse. Della watched with something close to satisfaction. Something she wasn't proud of, and didn't entirely regret either. "I don't know what this is about," Merrick said, backing toward the door bag, still hanging from his shoulder, like he might somehow talk his way into keeping it. 14 months of falsified invoices says otherwise," Ortiz said. "You want to have that conversation here or somewhere quieter?" Merrick didn't answer. Didn't need to. His face had already answered for him. Della watched them both get walked out. Wade first, chin up in some last pointless performance of dignity. Then Merrick. Silent, the duffel bag, left behind on the chair, unclaimed its contents, no longer anyone's business but the state's. The bell rang one final time as the door swung shut behind them. And then, for a long moment, the dinner simply breathed. Nobody spoke first. Nobody quite knew how. Then from table 9, an older man in a trucker cap, a regular, Della recognized someone who'd tipped in quarters more mornings than she could count, set down his coffee, and started to clap. Slow at first, uncertain. Then someone else joined him, and someone else, until the whole diner was filled with the particular sound of people applauding something they didn't fully understand, but recognized in their bones as justice, arriving exactly when it was needed. Della stood in the middle of it, hands still shaking, and didn't quite know what to do with a room clapping for her. "This isn't, I didn't do anything. I just survived it. Is that enough to earn this? Does surviving something count as, hey?" Bernadette's hand found her shoulder, steady grounding. "Breathe. You're allowed to just stand here a second. Nobody's asking you to say a speech." Della let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for what felt like 6 weeks straight. Emmett crossed the floor toward her. Slower now. The urgency of the confrontation drained out of him, leaving something gentler behind. He stopped a respectful distance away, close enough to speak quietly, far enough not to crowd her. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You don't owe me anything. You just—" "I do." He was quiet a moment, choosing the words carefully. The way a man chooses words he's been rehearsing in his head for longer than he wants to admit. "I built this place to be somewhere people felt looked after. Instead, for 2 weeks, I sat in that booth every morning and watched you get treated like you didn't matter, and it took me far too long to do anything about it. That's on me. Not you, never you. Della felt something crack open in her chest. Not pain, exactly. Something closer to relief, so large it hurt on the way out. Nobody's ever said that to me before, she said, voice unsteady. Not like that. Not meaning it. I mean it. Emmett's eyes were steady kind, carrying decades of something Della couldn't fully name yet. You've been doing the work of 3 people, on a hand that hadn't finished healing, smiling through it, because you didn't think you had another option. That ends today. He turned then, found Bernadette across the room, and something in his posture shifted softer. Older, a man about to say something. He'd needed to say for 6 years, and hadn't known until tonight that he'd ever get the chance. Bernadette. She stiffened just slightly. Mr. Coulson. Emmett, he corrected gently. Please. He crossed to her. The whole diner, still buzzing with adrenaline, seemed to quiet again. Some instinct telling every person in the room that this next part mattered. 2. Mattered differently, mattered in a way that deserved its own silence. I found a report in that office, Emmett said. Old one, 6 years old. Your name on it. A shortage that got written down in your file and never once got questioned. Bernadette's jaw tightened. She said nothing. I don't know everything that happened. Emmett went on. But I know enough. I know a pattern when I see one, and I know what it cost you, because you've been standing behind that counter for 6 years, doing half the job you used to do. And I never once asked myself why a woman with your experience wasn't running this floor anymore. Wasn't your job to ask, Bernadette said, quiet, careful. The practiced neutrality of a woman who'd learned not to expect apologies and didn't quite know what to do with one arriving unannounced. It was exactly my job, Emmett said. This was Eleanor's diner before it was mine to lose track of. She knew every person who walked through that door by name within a week. She would have known something was wrong with you inside of a day, Bernadette. I let this place run on autopilot for 11 years, and you paid for that. I'm sorry, truly. Something in Bernadette's face gave way. Not tears, not quite, but close enough that she had to look down at the counter for a moment, blinking hard. Composing herself the way a woman does when she's spent 6 years being the one who held everyone else together. I should have fought it, she said low. Back then, should have found a way. You had a granddaughter depending on you and no good options in front of you, Emmett said. That's not a failure, Bernadette. That's just what surviving looks like sometimes. Nobody gets to judge that from the outside. She looked up at him. Something passed between them. Old grief, maybe? Or the particular understanding of 2 people who'd both spent years quietly carrying weight they never asked anyone to help with. So what happens now? She asked. Now Emmett said, you run this floor the way you were always meant to. Full title, full pay, backdated to cover what you should have been earning for the last 6 years, as much as I can manage on my end. And you train whoever comes through that door next, so nobody who works here again has to learn the hard way what kind of place this is or isn't. Bernadette didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice had gone rough at the edges. Eleanor would have liked you saying that. Eleanor. Emmett said something warm, breaking through the weariness in his voice for the first time all day. Would have had Wade Kessler out on that sidewalk inside a week, and she'd have done it a lot louder than I just did. That surprised a small, real laugh out of Bernadette. Short cracked, but genuine, the first Della had heard from her all afternoon. The diner didn't fully empty out until well past closing. Customers lingered the trucker in the cap. The two women from the corner booth who'd spent weeks whispering, and now sat quiet, chastened, clearly working through some private reckoning of their own about the difference between noticing something and doing something about it. Somebody bought a round of pie for 3 tables insisted, wouldn't hear otherwise. The radio kept playing low behind it all. Some old song nobody paid much attention to, filling the spaces between conversations that had suddenly unexpectedly turned warm. Emmett stayed until the last table cleared. Then he asked Della and Bernadette to sit with him one more time in the corner booth that had quietly become the most important seat in the whole building. "There's more," he said once the 3 of them were settled coffee cups between them, the diner finally blessedly quiet. "About why I've been sitting in this booth for 2 weeks. About why any of this mattered to me as much as it did." He told them about Eleanor then. Really told them not the polished version he'd given the room earlier, but the fuller one. How they'd met, working a diner counter 43 years ago. 2 kids with nothing but a shared conviction that a restaurant could be more than a place people passed through, on their way to somewhere else. How she'd insisted on learning every regular's name inside a week. How she'd comped meals for strangers having bad days without ever telling him the total, because she said some things weren't meant to be tallied. How the cancer had taken 11 months to finish what it started, and how he hadn't set foot behind that counter again until 2 weeks ago, because the grief had felt for over a decade like something a person could outrun, simply by staying away from the place that held the memory of it. "I told myself I was protecting the place by staying distant," he said. "Truth is, I was protecting myself. And in the meantime, a man like Wade Kessler walked in and turned it into something Eleanor never would have recognized." He looked between them, something steadying behind his eyes. "I owe both of you more than an apology can cover. But it's what I've got to start with." Della thought of Wren, then of the inhaler, with 4 days left in it, when this whole thing started, of the $31 she hadn't had, of 9 days of rent, that had felt not so long ago like the edge of a cliff she was one bad shift away from going over. "Mr. Coulson, Emmett." "Emmett!" She had to stop, steady her voice. "You don't know what these last 6 weeks have cost me. Not just the—" She glanced at her wrist, still wrapped, still healing. "Not just this. The fear. The math I couldn't stop doing every single night. I don't know how to just say thank you for that being over. It doesn't feel big enough." "It's big enough," Emmett said. "You don't owe me a speech either." He reached into his jacket, drew out a folded envelope, and set it gently on the table between them. "This isn't charity. It's back pay you should have been earning as floor supervisor these past months, if I'd been paying attention sooner, along with whatever your daughter's medical costs have run these last weeks. Consider it Ellie's diner finally doing the job it was built to do." Della opened the envelope with hands that had gone unsteady again for entirely different reasons than they'd been unsteady all day. She didn't count it in front of him. Didn't need to. Not really, just needed to see enough of it to know that 4 days of inhaler refills and $31 of impossible math had just quietly stopped being the thing that kept her up at night. "Floor supervisor," she repeated, testing the shape of the words. "Starting Monday. If you'll have it." She looked at Bernadette. Bernadette looked back, something like pride settling into the lines of her face. "About time somebody around here got promoted for doing the actual work," Bernadette said. 3 months later, Ellie's diner looked in almost every visible way exactly the same as it always had. Same booths, same chipped counter, same bell over the door that rang every single time somebody came or went. The lunch rush still hit hard around 11:30. The coffee still smelled faintly burnt by the time the afternoon lull rolled in. Nothing about the building itself had changed. Everything else had. The wall by the register held photographs, again, new ones framed carefully. Della's own hand, steady enough now, to have hung half of them herself. A photo of the whole staff taken the week Bernadette officially became floor manager. A photo of Emmett uncharacteristically smiling, standing in front of a small brass plaque that read simply, "In memory of Eleanor Colson, who believed everyone deserved to be seen." Della's wrist had healed properly, by then full range of motion, back the ache gone, except on cold mornings when it sometimes still whispered a memory. She'd stopped needing it to whisper. She moved through the floor now with a different kind of ease. Not the practiced smile of a woman performing fine. Something realer. Something that had room in it to actually mean what it showed. She was restocking the napkin dispensers. A task. She still did herself some mornings, some habits, too, grounding to fully hand off when she noticed the new girl. Priya, 19, maybe 20. Started 2 weeks back, still learning which regulars took their coffee. Black, and which ones needed the good creamer kept behind the counter for exactly that purpose. She was good at the job, quick, careful, the kind of quiet competence that reminded Della uncomfortably of someone she used to be. Today, though, something was off. Priya moved through the floor with her shoulders drawn and tight eyes, down flinching slightly. Every time the new assistant manager, a brisk, impatient man named Colton, hired 3 weeks back to help cover Bernadette's expanding responsibilities, raised his voice across the room. Priya Table 4's been waiting on their check for 5 minutes. What is the holdup? I'm sorry, I'll get right. You keep saying sorry. Saying sorry doesn't ring up the tab. Della felt something old and sharp rise up the back of her throat. Recognition, immediate and total, the specific shape of a young woman, shrinking herself in real time to survive a room. I know that voice. Not his voice exactly. That kind. The kind that makes a person feel like an inconvenience just for existing in the space they're required to work in. Not again. Not in this building. Not on my floor. She set down the napkin dispensers. Crossed the room without hurrying, without making a scene the way she'd learned from Bernadette, from Emmett, from 6 long weeks of surviving. Something she wouldn't wish on anyone, that the most powerful thing a person could do sometimes was simply refuse to let a moment pass unchallenged. "Colton," she said, easy pleasant, the tone of a woman with nothing to prove and every intention of proving it anyway. "Table 4's my table today. I've got it. I was just telling her." "I heard what you were telling her." Della kept her voice level kind, but there was something underneath it now that hadn't been there 6 months ago. Something with an edge to it, earned the hard way. "Priya's doing great. First few weeks are always a lot to juggle. I remember." Colton opened his mouth. Closed it again, something in Della's expression, making the argument feel suddenly not worth having. "Fine," he muttered, and moved on to find some other fire to put out. Della turned to Priya, who was still standing there, wide-eyed, cheeks flushed with the particular humiliation of being corrected in front of a room full of customers. "You okay?" Della asked, quiet now just for her. "I'm fine, Priya's voice wavered. "I don't know, I just feel like I can't do anything right lately." "Hey." Della caught her eye. Held it. "You're doing everything right. Some people just like making other people feel small. It's never about you. It's about them." Priya blinked hard, nodding, some tension easing out of her shoulders that Della recognized, because she'd carried the exact same tension herself once in this exact building for 6 weeks that had felt at the time like they might never end. "Thank you," Priya said. "Anytime." Della squeezed her shoulder gentle brief. "And Priya, if anybody in this place ever makes you feel like you can't say something, you come find me. Whatever it is, I mean that." She meant it more than Priya could have known. That evening, after close, Della found herself in the corner booth with Bernadette and Emmett, a small, unofficial ritual that had formed itself somewhere in the last 3 months. 3 cups of coffee going cold, while the diner settled into its nighttime quiet around them. "Had to have a word with Colton today," Della said. "New hire situation. Nothing major. Handled it." Bernadette raised an eyebrow. "Handled it how? The way you'd have handled it." Della smiled, small tired in the good way now, instead of the other kind. Reminded him some people deserve a little patience while they're learning. Emmett watched her over the rim of his coffee cup, something unmistakably proud settling into the lines of his face. "You know," he said, "Eleanor used to say something back when we first opened. Every single person who walks through that door is carrying something you can't see. Might be grief, might be exhaustion, might just be a hard week nobody bothered to ask them about. She said the whole job, the real job underneath the coffee and the eggs, was just paying enough attention to notice and caring enough to do something about it once you did." He looked at Della, then at Bernadette, something in his expression settling finally, after everything, into something that looked almost like peace. "I think she'd be glad," he said, "to see this place finally living up to that again." Outside, the street light flickered on over the parking lot, the same way it had for 40 years, the same way it would for however many years came after this one. Inside, 3 people sat together in a booth that had held every kind of secret this diner had ever kept, grief and fear, and finally quietly something that felt a great deal like healing. Della thought of Wren at home, asleep by now. One arm probably flung above her head, the way it always was, breathing easy, needing nothing tonight but the ordinary safety of a mother who'd finally stopped having to fight so hard just to provide it. "We made it," she thought. "Not because someone rescued us, because somebody finally actually looked. And once you're seen, really seen, it turns out that's most of what you needed all along." The bell above the door had gone quiet for the night. But somewhere in that stillness, it felt like it was still ringing, not for a customer walking in, but for something else entirely. For a diner and the people inside it finally becoming exactly what it was always meant to be.